Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So happy to have you here to talk about my 10 favorite books of 2025. Now, I read a lot of books this year and I understand it is quite more than the average person, but I just wanted to always start these videos off by saying, like, no matter if you've read one book or 129 books like I have, your reading is valid, and it's really cool to just like continue to read books, especially physical books, but I'm also a big advocate for audiobooks. So whether you listen to the book, whether you were on your e-reader, library book, like any of that is really important. And I always encourage people to read however much they can. So I love to read. Is my favorite pastime. And I do have other hobbies, but like my primary hobby is reading, and I do it while I'm doing other things. So if you want to know like how and when I make time to read, I made a whole video. I think I can link it down below. I don't remember when it came out, but all that aside, I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite books from this year. And yeah, I think we're just going to start in reverse orders from 10 to 1. And I'm going to try to spend less time on like 5 through 10 and more time on 5 through 1. Also, if you want to hear about my non-book favorites from this year, that was my last video. And I also did a little desk tour. So I've been trying to be a little bit more active on here and would love if you checked those out as well. And yeah, these books aren't necessarily ones that released this year. Some of them are, actually a decent amount of them are new releases, but it's just in general books that I read in the year 2025. All right, now that we've got all that out of the way, number 10 is The Grief Keeper by Alexandra Villasante. I don't have the physical copy of this one, but this one is one that took me by surprise for sure. I think this one would have been a little bit higher if it wasn't a little bit more targeted to a younger audience, which is not a problem. Like, I have several YA books that are on my top list. But I think that towards the end of the book, it kind of lost a little bit of the impact and the magic for me, but still an incredible book. Essentially, you are following two sisters that are escaping violence, specifically gang violence in El Salvador, and trying to immigrate into the US. You are following 17-year-old Marisol and her little sister Gabby after their brother was killed. And they are not able to take refuge in America. They're not granted asylum. So they have another person who is like works at the agency that they are visiting that gives them an opportunity and gives them a ride to New Jersey, where they participate in this government sanctioned experiment that they are running to help soldiers with PTSD, where essentially that's like the initial intent, but you learn a lot more throughout the story about what the true intentions are and how it affects our main character. But essentially she participates in an experiment where they have a machine or like a gadget that can transfer grief from one person to another. So they can take like the grief and pain from one person and have that another person like bear it for them. As an empath and someone who like wishes that they could do this for people, but understands like the impact of that, I do think like it really resonated with me, and that's why it's super high on my list. But it's an incredible story. It's very impactful, and I highly recommend it. That's my number 10. My number 9 is The Sirens by Amelia Hart. This one is from an author that I've read from before, and I really enjoyed Wayward. This one I enjoyed more, and I think like the way that Amelia Hart tells her stories is very intriguing to me. Like, she follows 3 women separated by like hundreds of years, but there's like this interweaving story that kind of connects them all together. That's not a spoiler, that's like the premise. But you have like 3 different time periods, 2 that are in like 1800 and 1 that's in 2019. And I like it too because you're kind of like, it's what I would consider like magical realism mixed with historical fantasy. Because the kind of like the opening premise is you're following Lucy, who wakes up like with like, she's like mid choking like her like ex-partner, and doesn't know how she got there, and like is having these weird lucid dreams, and starts to like have this sort of like transformation she's going through, and is like getting flashbacks of like this cave and this baby, and like women's voices. And so it's very interesting to like the way that she kind of parallels their story with the past story, and there's some back and forth there, and it has like some mystery elements woven throughout because one of them is also looking for their sister who's missing. And so you get like a detective POV. There's a lot of good stuff in here for sure. Okay, and this is my one that I have physically, and that is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. And this is the only romance in my top 10. I've started to like romance a bit more, but one thing that I really like about this one is it's very much like contemporary romance, and Abby Jimenez just has such like thought-provoking characters that I've noticed so far. This is my first book, but technically it's my second. I read Part of Your World, and I know like her books are in a way like interconnected, like the universes, but you can read them separately and it not necessarily affect like your enjoyment level. I think there's just like cameos, I believe. But I read this, I will say that sometimes like my reading environment can affect my rating. And I read this like on our cruise that we went on this year. So that was really cool. It's got this like tropical, obviously vibe, but you're following your main character. Oh, I left my tabs in here. You're following Emma, who has this like curse that she says that she has where like every time she breaks up with someone or like her relationship ends, they find the love of their life like right after. And then she like is talking about it on like Reddit or something and discovers this guy who says that he has the same like condition or whatever. And so they kind of like go on a date to see if they can like cancel each other out because so it's kind of like not fake dating because like it starts out as like a joke in a way, but obviously things change and things evolve. But that's not even like my favorite part of the story. I do think it's a really big part of like why I enjoy it because I think both characters, like Justin and Emma, the two main characters, have such like well thought out lives and like personhood. And I love that in a romance because I do feel like typically either one or the other of your like love interest is the stronger voice. But I feel like both of them have such strong character voices and like their own traumas and their own issues, and I love how they work through them together. And there's a lot of like family dynamic discussion because Justin has like he adopted his siblings, and so both of them have some like parental issues, really really in-depth parental issues. And so a lot of that is explored too. This is a longer one, but to me it just like flew by. Her writing is so addictive, and yeah, I love this one. Okay, The Serpent and the Wings of Night, I always mess up this title, is my number 7. And this is another one that I know was like super popular a few years ago. And I never like, I don't know, I'll be honest, the cover doesn't really like speak to me. And that does have to draw me in if I don't like have any particular past interest in it. But don't judge this book by its cover. I love this book. And obviously because it's on my top 10. But this is not your traditional like romantic-y vampire book. I love this main character. Araya is our main character's name. And essentially she is a human who is like the adopted daughter of like this vampire king. And so she's around vampires all the time, but she is a human. And like that's a pretty like typical trope, but I love how strong of a female main character she is. And her inner monologue is amazing. I really enjoy it. And essentially she is like, she wants to become immortal, but this world is very dangerous. Like the vampire lore is a little bit more traditional, like old school vampires in this one. So, and they operate under the goddess Nyx. And I just love, like, there's a game that is presented where she has to win and survive. And like, it's like till death, but she makes friends along the way, which makes it really tough for her since everyone in this competition is supposed to die except the winner. And her love interest that comes into play, Rain, I really like him as well, and the other friends that she makes along the way. This is the only one that I've read so far. I'm kind of scared to read the rest of the series because I'm like, can it be as good as this one? Because this one was so like profound to me. But I know it sounds like pretty general in its like description, but the writing is really well done and the character work also is really good. So yeah. Alrighty, number 6 is a late addition to the top, and it is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a new release that came out, I want to say a few months ago, and I was worried I wasn't going to get to it this year, but I'm so glad that I did. It's just this, Taylor Jenkins Reid never misses, in my opinion. I know I've only read a couple things by her. Malibu Rising is one of my favorite books of all time by her. This one's no different. Essentially, you're following Joan, who is one of the first female astronauts at NASA. And so you have her kind of like education throughout, like becoming a part of NASA and being a woman in this obviously male dominated field, because it's also in the 1980s when the program kind of like is just starting. And so that is just one piece of the story. You also are following her dynamic with her family, specifically her sister and her niece. And her sister is not the best parent. And so she is kind of like picking up the role of a mother for Francis. But there's like a really complicated dynamic there because she wants her sister to succeed and for them all to like be a part of each other's life. But very clearly, she's not showing up as she needs to for her daughter. So all of that is described in a really cool way. And then there is like an inciting incident where there's like an accident on the aircraft, like in space. So you kind of are going back and forth between the incident and like the past. And I really like how the story's laid out in that way. I don't want to spoil anything, but you're also following like her romantic interest and like this woman named Vanessa. And that's explored in a very interesting way as well. And like very impactful story-wise, like the weight of being in this time and being in this potential relationship. So, and being a woman in a male dominated field. So all of that I really loved. Amazing quotes in this one. And I would recommend this to anyone. Her writing is so good. Alrighty, next up we have our top 5. Very exciting. And we are going to be talking about Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McGonaghy. And I also love the other book that I've read by her, which is Once There Were Wolves, was one of my favorites last year. Or was it the year before last year? I can't remember. This one is a perfect blend, in my opinion, of a contemporary novel with a mystery, with like a little bit of like, it's not historical, but you're following Dominic and his family. They have 3 kids. He has 3 kids, and their mother just passed away fairly recently. And they're on this like remote island off of Antarctica. And there's like, the climate is like wrecked. Essentially, they're there to preserve what's left of the island, and specifically this like seed bank that is there. If you read Salt Crop this year that came out, which I also really loved, it didn't quite crack the top 10 for me, but we read it for our book club. This is a very similar vibe, but not sci-fi, more contemporary or mystery. And essentially they're kind of like dealing with their own dynamics when a woman like washes up onto shore, and her name is Rowan, and they're trying to figure out like what the heck she's doing there. And you like go back and forth between POVs of some of the children, the husband Dominic, or the father Dominic, and Rowan. And so it's a pretty short book, but I feel like it packs such an emotional punch in the way that it delivers all that I just mentioned. The mystery, the family dynamics, the weight of like responsibility for the world, like all kinds of stuff. So love this one. Also the cover is beautiful. My number 4, which is Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. I don't know if I said that right. I feel like I always say it wrong, but look how beautiful. Also, this edition is just amazing. And this one I've talked about on my channel because I did a whole reading vlog around it when I was at the beach, and that was really fun. So I've discussed it, but to kind of like re-summarize it, this book can be a little daunting because R.F. Kuang is very like intellectual in her books. There's a lot of like academia, a lot of mythology in this one, but I found it pretty easy to follow in the way that she describes it. And I learned a lot reading this book. I think that the dynamic between our characters, Alice and Peter, and the professor is just incredibly well done. I think going into this one with not a lot of knowledge of what is happening, but except I do think this is very incorrectly marketed as kind of like a romance. It definitely is not a romance. It is more of like a dark academia story. I think that's the best way I can describe it. Fantasy. Essentially, the 2 students have this like academic rivalry, and they kind of like had this unhealthy like obsession with their professor, who they accidentally kill, and he gets like sent to the 7 layers of hell, and they're going there to like rescue him. There's some problems with like, it's not a perfect book to me though. The level of like completely consumed by this book. Like I read it almost in its entirety in one sitting, and I think that says a lot about it. And I love this book. I don't know that's for everyone, but it's definitely for me. And my number 3, I also don't have a physical copy of, but it is Heavenly Tyrant by Ren Zhao. And Iron Widow was also on my top favorites either of last year or the year before. I forget what year it came out and I read it. But this one reminds me, the duology itself reminds me a lot of Attack on Titan, which I did not intentionally wear, but is also one of my favorite things ever. And I can't say a ton about the sequel without like spoiling some things that I think that you should find out by reading it yourself because it's incredible. Duology. The first one, like I mentioned, is Iron Widow. And I think that the blurb that Goodreads has is a very, like, pretty accurate. It's described as Pacific Rim meets The Handmaid's Tale in this blend of Chinese history and mecha science fiction. I feel like it's incorrectly marketed towards younger readers because I do think that can like dissuade people sometimes from diving in, but it is very intense. And essentially in the first one, I'll kind of describe that one more than the second one because I don't want to spoil anything, but you are following Zetian. And I think that the reason it's like lumped into the category of YA is because the main character's younger. But essentially they have this like concubine pilot kind of system where essentially in order to fuel these mecha machines that they have to use to protect their home, the pilots have to assassinate a woman, and that like, they like use her like chi, her magical energy, because only women have it in this world, to like fuel the machine. And so she originally sets off to like avenge her sister who was like wrongly killed, and she forms this like psychic link with the spirit that kind of like is the figure for this machine. I know it's kind of a lot to explain, but essentially like think fantasy mechs powered by chi, Chinese folklore, and feminine rage. And that is these 2 books. Speaking of rage, we have my number 2 book, which is The Lion Women of Tehran by Maherjan Kamali. And I, as you can see, devoured this book. I think that one of the reasons why I love reading is to be able to gain perspective that I wouldn't otherwise by reading and being immersed into a culture, a lifestyle, anything like that that I wasn't previously familiar with or that is not my own. And that is what I feel like I was able to accomplish with this book, especially reading it with our book club. This is a fantastic book club discussion book. And essentially you are following Oma and Ellie, and you're in 1950s Iran, Tehran specifically. And I will be honest, like I didn't know a lot about this kind of like era and the relationship between Iran and the US in this time. And I learned a lot, including the way that the political activism kind of like initiated in this era. But the story itself with Oma and Ellie, they're really young when the story starts. They're in grade school. And they live like 2 totally different lives. Like one of them is more like wealthy and of like a high influence family. And then one of them is obviously not, and like more in like a poor family, and is more of an activist for like women's rights, political like warfare that's happening in this area or starting to happen. And you slowly, like as time goes on, like see their rights as women start to be stripped away, and how that affects both of the characters in their lives separately and together with their friendship. And it is very tough to read at times. There's a lot of really heavy subject matter in this, so definitely check the trigger warnings before you start, just in case. But I think this is a very important story, and I think that the way that it ends is so beautiful, and I love the way that their dynamic changes over time, and they kind of like flip-flop in their like, due to what happens to them and like their life experiences, they kind of change the way that they view the world. Obviously, like that's what happens when you grow up. But yeah, I think this book is amazing. And it was really hard because I think I went back and forth on whether this should be my number 1 or not, but it's kind of like tied for my number 1, I guess. But super good. Alrighty, and finally, my number 1 book is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. And this book is huge. I know you can see I stopped tabbing. That's because I was getting confused because I was going back and forth between audiobook and physical book because I just wanted to read it nonstop. It is like 1,300 pages. It is the longest book that I read this year. And this one's tough because it's the very end of this first arc of the Cosmere. And 2025 was the year I really read Brandon Sanderson and read it in depth. And I'm going to continue reading from Brandon Sanderson this year. But yeah, this one, I was just so pleasantly surprised with how much incredible mental health representation is in this book, like directly. Shallan, Yasna, Kaladin, Szeth, like, and this is really like described as like Szeth's book, if you're familiar with the Cosmere. But I don't want to spoil anything because I think like these books, like I mentioned, are all phenomenal. But it's a long series. I know it's very daunting, but to me, it's very worth it if you love, like, I was initially deterred from this series because it's described as like such high, like intense fantasy. The world building is a lot, and it is a lot to follow. And I think it's kind of in the beginning was where the learning curve really was for me to like get used to the world. But Brandon Sanderson's writing is actually very approachable, especially compared to some other like high fantasy I've read, like the Game of Thrones books. I didn't necessarily love. I'm trying to think of other examples, but yeah, it's very approachable and it's very good. Like I love everything that this book does, and I'll remember it for a really long time. I'm excited for whenever the second like arc of the Cosmere happens. I can't wait to read the rest of Brandon Sanderson's novels and see like the tie-ins and everything. I finished the first Mistborn era. I need to read the next era, and I'm going to do that this year. So yeah, that's my number one. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching my top 10 books of 2025. I will have another video coming where I do like my stats and superlatives. So talking through like all the different stats of the year, which I love doing, and my like best sequel, like most disappointing, like I'll talk through some of those as well in that video, which will be coming soon. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.